Welcome to This Week in Racing, and I'm going to be upfront and honest with you right now. This is not an episode I'd watch with the kids. We're going to be delving into some pretty heavy topics, and nothing says a Christmas season like FBI raids and racism, but that's what we're talking about this week. So, that being said, because it's the Christmas season, the holiday season, and the last show of the year will be coming up next week, I would like to open it up to you guys, kind of experiment with something new that I might like to kind of expand upon in 2019. And I would like to talk about the topics that you want me to talk about. So go down in the comments right now and let me know what topic you'd like me to cover in next week's This Week in Racing. I'll take the top 5 upvoted comments, so the ones with the most thumbs up, I will talk about. Keep it racing related. Obviously, no one wants to hear my opinion on Johnny Rock Page, so I will not put that opinion out there. But if it's racing related, let me know down in the comments, and we'll talk some racing. I'm kind of interested to see which subjects you come up with. And so now, let's talk, and let's get into a very heavy episode of This Week in Racing. So, Chip Ganassi Racing sponsored DC Solar was raided by the FBI this week. 20 agents raided the home of Jeff Karpoff, the CEO and owner of the company. There were vehicles towed, as well as computers, cell phones, and receipts stolen, confiscated from the home. Now, obviously, the FBI does not come a knocking on your door just because you've got some Christmas cookies you want to give them. Usually there's something pretty serious for them to get involved. Again, it's the high levels of the federal government. They don't really pay a lot of attention to petty crimes. So regardless of the situation, this is something that people who are Ganassi Racing fans or people who are affected by DC Solar's involvement in motorsports are going to need to perk up. Not the least of which is Ross Chastain, who we just talked about a couple weeks ago and actually talked about obviously throughout the season as one of the great stories going through 2018, a great comeback, a great rise to prominence when he got an opportunity in a DC Solar sponsored Xfinity car for Chip Ganassi Racing, got a win and got a lot of notoriety for racing Kevin Harvick very hard at Darlington. And now it appears that, at least right now, that Ross Chastain's full-time Xfinity Series season for next year may be hanging in the balance, because apparently the CEO, Jeff Karpoff, easy for me to say, was really one of the principal guys behind making the full season happen for Ross Chastain. He's the reason, DC Solar is, that we're not talking about Kyle Larson bushwhacking in the 42 for next year. It's a full-time guy. Now we sit in a situation where we've got everything up in the air, especially about the Xfinity program. Now, that being said, I'm well aware, and you probably saw in the photos in the intro, that DC Solar sponsored heavy portions of the NASCAR Monster Energy Cup series for both Kyle Larson and Jamie McMurray, as well as picked up a few races for Ed Jones over on the IndyCar side of things. That being said, I'm not as worried about those programs, especially considering Kurt Busch is slotted into that one car for next year, and Felix Rosenqvist is over there on the IndyCar side of things. Both of those drivers, from what I understand, obviously Kurt Busch because of the Monster Energy, both of those drivers bring funding. So the idea that those few races, especially over on the IndyCar side, probably negligible impact that DC Solar would have on that program. The NASCAR program, again, probably solidified quite a bit by Monster Energy coming on board on that team. So I'm not so worried about that, but I certainly am worried about the Xfinity Series program. It may end up turning out that Chastain is unable to run the full season, or it just depends what happens here. And again, they confiscated vehicles, cell phones, all that stuff. So it's not like it's clear that there's something fishy in the water. And it's not like we're talking about a fine here. If there was a fine, or even if the owner went to jail, Gene Haas, for God's sakes, has been to jail. I think Rick Hendrick went to jail at one point. That's not necessarily something that is going to automatically mean that people are going to, the sponsorship is going to go away or the money is going to go away. But when there's a potential that the federal government may either shut this whole thing down or, significantly impact this operation, the solar company, by just, arresting everybody associated or all the high level people, and then some different people come into the company and then they say, why are you sponsoring racing? That sort of thing may happen. So I'm worried about Ross Chastain. I think a lot of people are. Again, until we have more details, we're not going to be able to really make a huge determination from that. And certainly the FBI hasn't been successful every single time they've tried to get somebody on something like this. But again, 20 agents for serving a search warrant, confiscating all that stuff, it ain't a good sign. NBC Sports confirmed this week that Paul Tracy will indeed keep his job as a color commentator for next year's IndyCar Series season on NBC Sports. This came on the heels of a major controversy which surfaced a couple of months ago, in which Paul Tracy allegedly wrote some racially charged Facebook posts. There was an altercation on Facebook that involved Paul Tracy debating the immigration debate, and that always seems to bring out the best in people. And this particular debate with a man by the name of Chris Cunningham went particularly far. As you can see, this screenshot, obviously you can read that for yourself. I'm not going to read it, but Chris Cunningham was sent this by Paul Tracy. It appears to be in a public Facebook thread, and Cunningham sent this off to the Indy Star as well as NBC Sports and IndyCar, and that's what created this controversy originally. Now, that being said, there was a 2-month investigation, allegedly, by NBC, in which they determined that Paul Tracy did not, to the best of their knowledge, write this particular post. Now, Tracy has maintained that he was hacked and he himself did not write the post. So, obviously, Paul Tracy will be a color commentator for next year's IndyCar Series. That is a fact. We know that. Everything else, regardless of what NBC's investigation, in my opinion, said, I think he wrote the post. Let's just say that. I think he absolutely wrote it. If this was an isolated incident, I could believe that certainly that Paul Tracy, it could have been faked, or even I would have accepted Paul Tracy coming out and saying, yeah, I wrote the post. I said, really stupid thing. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. The problem is we have all this circumstantial evidence all around Paul Tracy and surrounding him. And frankly, NBC couldn't figure out how to balance their IndyCar and NASCAR schedules. I don't expect them to be able to pull off an investigation of Facebook. And a lot of this is saving face. There's no doubt about it. All of this is saving face. NBC absolutely played the waiting game. Now, do I blame them for that? I will say no, and I'll explain why later. But the circumstantial evidence surrounding Tracy and some of the comments and some of the off-color jokes that he's made on social media before, certainly, again, to me, my opinion, he absolutely wrote the post, 100%. And even talking circumstantial evidence, he's used this hacked excuse before. Now, it certainly, the first time he used it, it wasn't anything particularly racially charged. It was actually a post on Track Forum implying that Randy Bernard was in the pocket of Target, and that's why they penalized did not penalize Dario Franchitti for contact with Will Power at the end of the Toronto 2011 race. That was something that Tracy has used before. He used it here again, and they stuck with it. Now, that being said, I'm not going to go as far as to say definitively that Paul Tracy is an ist or an ism. I'm not going to say that. I don't know Paul personally. I've spoken to him briefly one time in my life, and I don't know many people who know Paul personally. So I can't make that determination or judge of character. I can only base what I've seen on social media and base what I know from kind of his past behaviors. But one person, and I will give them all the credit in the world for doing this, because it's really the only prominent or relevant person in the IndyCar community who has come out and said that they 100% believe that Paul Tracy is a racist, and that is Marshall Pruett. He said this on his podcast, and I'm going to play you a little clip of that right now.
You pick the photo of yourself standing next to the cigarette that has been targeted towards African American audiences, and you could say obviously has led to many deaths, cancer and otherwise as a result. That's what you choose, and then you want to play it off. Oh, hey, it's just a photo of me standing next to a race car. That's racist behavior, and that's one of many. Any claims or denials, just pure nonsense. There's been a willful asking or request for folks to just allow that side. Oh, I didn't mean anything by you. Boy, you're the racist for thinking that. No, this is who you are. So I'm comfortable with that. I have no question about that. And the things that I've heard directly from the man's mouth this year in particular. There's one incident. I won't go into it now. Maybe I will a little bit later. But just walked away going, boy, that sure is a window into a very dark racist side of you. So I'm comfortable with that because I've seen it, witnessed it. I know that to be what it is.
So, and I would suggest, by the way, just even, taking that small clip into account, that you go check out Marshall Pruett's full thoughts on this. I believe it was the December 5th edition of his podcast. I think despite the fact that he was willing to come out, and by the way, again, I applaud him for doing it, because if this is true, Marshall's the only guy speaking out against it, who has any kind of influence or power in this situation. So credit to him. And I also think he handles the situation, which really is super, super sensitive. I mean, and a lot of times the reaction from people who feel the way Marshall does, that Paul Tracy is a racist, or they believe that he's a racist, a lot of times it comes off incredibly vitriolic and hyperbolic, and it doesn't really get a whole lot done because ultimately it looks like somebody is just, screaming in their 240 letters on Twitter, and then it doesn't look like they're really taking any action outside of that. It just comes down to shit posting more than actually, taking a stand or anything. They type their tweet and then they go off and do whatever else they do in the world. So I appreciate Marshall speaking up on his platform. Again, I think, especially if you're one of the people who believes Paul and believes that he's not a racist, or that he certainly didn't write these posts, I think you should go at least listen to that side of the things, or at least that side of the thing, and hear someone reasonable on the other side talking about it, because again, it all kind of devolves into the meme. The us versus them, stupidity, politics, one side or the other, and there is no middle ground, and everybody on one side or everybody on the other is the enemy of the other one. And there's a lot more subtlety to situations like this than I think a lot of people are willing to give it credit for. Now, that being said, Paul Tracy was incredibly lucky in this situation. I think in almost virtually any other situation, he would have been fired immediately. And I was actually surprised initially that he wasn't. Considering the climate that we live in, the outrage culture, the social media mobs, it almost always seems that when something like this happens or hits, then almost immediately a corporation will knee-jerk react to it and will, immediately take action. That didn't happen. And there's a couple reasons for that. The first reason is this did not gain any major mainstream attention. There were, from what I understand, from what I remember reading, there were two hit pieces I saw. The first one was the Indy Star one that broke the story, and then the other one was on a car blog with kind of middling credibility at best, as well as, barely any kind of mainstream relevancy. So when it's just those two things, Deadspin didn't pick it up, ESPN didn't pick it up, hell, even NBC themselves, the big NBC, didn't pick it up. none of the political sphere really looked at this or paid it much attention. So really, I mean, if that had happened, if there was an article on CNN about Paul Tracy, if there were YouTubers who weren't in the racing space talking about it, if God forbid somebody like Count Dankula does a video or something on it, that maybe would have driven the conversation in a completely different direction, and we'd be talking about a completely different result here. The other thing is, and this is I think some people are going to think this is a stretch, but I guarantee you it had some bearing on this whole situation. And it was what happened earlier this year with the Derek Daly, Connor Daly, Lilly diabetes controversy. A similar situation on face value. You had a racially charged incident in the motorsports community. Derek Daly admitted freely to using the N-word back in 1983. The details were unclear at the time when he admitted to it to his bosses at the Channel 13 network in Indianapolis, which I believe is an NBC affiliate, by the way, which is a little bit of a crazy coincidence. Channel 13 immediately fired Derek Daly. They got rid of him immediately. It was clearly a zero-tolerance situation, even if you've said it in 1983 and didn't know the context because you were an Irish immigrant at that point. Regardless, that wasn't necessarily the controversial thing. The controversial thing was that Lilly Diabetes, who was sponsoring Connor Daly at the Road America Xfinity race, decided, because his father used the N-word in 1983, that Connor Daly was a liability and could no longer be sporting Lilly Diabetes logos on his car. And that created a huge, enormous backlash. I was actually kind of impressed that in this social media age where a lot of times people immediately will go to blame whoever has been ousted, I think it was nice to see that people recognized that Connor Daly absolutely got screwed in that situation, and Lilly Diabetes was a pretty shady corporation from that perspective. And as well, if they were this huge virtuous corporation that really cares about past racial issues, or if something or somebody has been not particularly nice to other races in the past, that you wouldn't do business with them. If they held those values, why on earth were they in NASCAR when they could have very easily Googled Wendell Scott and figured out that NASCAR did not have a very clear past in terms of racial relations, for sure. That being said, that particular backlash, because of how quickly those corporations reacted, and then to find out that really the situation was not as serious as it appeared to be as the story broke. As the story developed, everyone realized, whoa, maybe, at the very least, Lilly Diabetes went too far, and some people believed that Channel 13 went too far in firing Derek Daly for his unfortunate slip of the tongue in 1983. So NBC, I think, looked at that and said, hey, we can't do that. If we fire Paul, if we do this now, when it's already a hot iron in the IndyCar community, it will get mainstream attention. It will draw the wrong kind of press and the wrong kind of attention to IndyCar on NBC. Remember, IndyCar on NBC is the exclusive place to find IndyCar racing next year. They've already kind of made the fan base a little bit upset. Let's remember back to Sonoma. I mentioned this earlier. I mean, hell, I did a 20-minute babbling rant on it, and it got something like 20,000 views. So clearly, there was already a fan base that essentially had one strike already against NBC before they had gotten to the season. So if they had fired Paul Tracy, and what had come out now comes out that, well, we didn't find any evidence. regardless of whether I or anybody else believes that Paul Tracy did it, and maybe it would have been right to fire him on those circumstances, the majority of people, and I'm not talking about on Twitter, I'm not talking about even in these YouTube comments, I'm talking about the vast majority of people that would have tuned in for the Indy 500 this year. There's probably going to be more than have in the last 10 years if NBC promotes like they say they're going to promote. The vast majority of those people are not even going to know that Paul Tracy is a Canadian, much less that he made an off-color racist post on Facebook. So from NBC's perspective, why do you make it an issue, when, especially early on, when it may not be an issue 2 months from now? And that's where we are. The other argument, or at least the logic in NBC's decision here, or at least where I can kind of see why it is the way it is because, or at least what I consider to be the Chick-fil-A theory. And if you don't know, Chick-fil-A in the past has made some questionable statements regarding homosexuality and gay marriage and things of that nature. And there's been some major mainstream controversy over it. Lots of hit piece articles, lots of tweets, lots of angry people saying they're never going to eat Chick-fil-A again. But that being said, every day at noon, you go to Chick-fil-A and there's a line wrapping around the building, or if it's in the mall, it's wrapping all the way around the food court. If the chicken is good, people are going to continue to get the chicken. That is ultimately what a free market will provide. And so, again, you can only take Twitter so seriously, but when I ran a poll, there were something like 250 people that responded to it, and 75% of them said they liked Paul Tracy's commentary. Only 25% didn't. And again, that's a small sample size, but you have to assume that the majority of the fan base likes Paul Tracy's commentary. And by the way, I have to say, I do like Paul Tracy's commentary. I like his chemistry with Townsend Bell and Lee Diffie, and I think it's the best three-man booth we've had since Paul, Page, Sam Posey, and Bobby Unser. So people like the product that Paul produces. They like the work that he does. And ultimately, if this wasn't a major, or if this didn't bubble up into a major controversy, there's no reason that NBC would have to let him go, ultimately. And that's kind of the thing. If this had been Scott Goodyear, would we be talking about a completely different situation? Probably. They would have maybe had another opportunity to get rid of Paul Tracy if he was not as liked as a commentator as he is. Finally, I think you look at this, and I think they're going to keep Paul Tracy on a very short leash. I think many people have said that. I'm not the first. I won't be the last. That being said, I also do believe that they may have signed him to a short-term contract. We do know that they signed Paul Tracy this year. This was not an extension of a current contract. This was a new contract that was signed for 2019. It's possible that they'll keep him on for this year and maybe next year, and maybe they'll look to go in a different direction because Tracy could possibly be a liability somewhere down the road. For Paul Tracy himself, I hope he keeps his nose clean, and I hope if the things that others have said about him are true, that he, I guess, seeks help. I've had the displeasure of meeting a few racists in my time, and there's not a whole lot that in my opinion, that is going to change someone's mind when they hold those beliefs. But I hope he changes if that is indeed the real Paul Tracy, because there's really no place for that. I'm still going to enjoy his commentary, probably. And again, assuming he keeps his nose clean, this is going to be something that fades into the background and is brought up not very often. Just kind of like some of the other things he's done in the past and other public figures have done in the past. Again, it kind of comes down to that Chick-fil-A argument. If people like it, you'd be surprised what people will ignore when a person is well liked. So that was heavy. That was heavy. But I got through it. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've it's made you think, this discussion, I guess we could say, and I hope that everybody can move forward from this. I hope Paul Tracy doesn't stick his foot in his mouth anymore, and that's all you can really say at this point. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all that good stuff, and we'll see you in the next video. I don't know if I'll have a video out before Christmas. I still got a couple things that I think you guys know I'm working on, so we'll be working on those things. Hopefully we'll get them out, but hopefully we'll have a couple more videos at least before the new year. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and we'll see you in the next video.